They both retired to the Philippines within a few months of each other, both coming from the United States, both in their late 60s, and both working with almost the exact same monthly income, right around $2,000 coming in from Social Security and small savings. And on paper, everything about their plan looked solid. The cost of living was lower, rent was affordable, food was cheaper, and everywhere they looked online, people were saying the same thing, that if you could live on $2,000 in the U.S., you could live comfortably here. At first, it seemed like they were right. Both of them found places to live without much trouble. Both of them settled into a routine, and for the first few months, everything felt easier than expected. The kind of easy that makes you feel like you finally made the right decision after years of thinking about it, like all the stress from back home had been replaced with something slower, something more manageable, something that felt like it would actually last. But within a year, their situations started to look very different. One of them was still comfortable, still relaxed, still living the life he had imagined before making the move, while the other had started quietly adjusting things, cutting back in small ways, noticing expenses that didn't feel like a problem at first, but were starting to show up more often than he expected. And little by little, those small changes started to affect how he lived day to day. And the difference between them wasn't obvious in the beginning. It wasn't about how much money they had, because that part was almost identical. And it wasn't about some major mistake or one bad decision that changed everything overnight. It came down to something much smaller than that. A series of choices that didn't seem important at the time. Habits that carried over from their life in the U.S., and a few things they never really planned for, not because they ignored them, but because they didn't realize how often those small costs would show up once they were actually living here. And by the time one of them started to notice what was happening, it wasn't a single expense causing the problem. It was everything happening at once. In the beginning, their days looked almost identical. They both woke up early, partly out of habit from years of working back in the U.S., partly because the mornings felt different here, a little quieter, a little slower, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them had anywhere they needed to be. No schedule to follow, no deadlines waiting for them. Just the freedom to figure things out, one day at a time. They both found apartments that fit within what they thought was a comfortable range, somewhere between 12,000 and 18,000 pesos a month, depending on the area. Nothing luxury, but clean, furnished, and more than enough for what they needed, especially compared to what that same amount of money would get them back home. And for a while that alone made it feel like they had made the right move. Most days started the same way. Coffee at home, maybe a small breakfast, sometimes something simple picked up nearby, and then a short walk or ride into town, getting familiar with the area, learning where things were, figuring out which stores had better prices, which places felt comfortable, which routines started to feel like their own. And early on, the differences between them were almost impossible to notice. One of them leaned into the idea of keeping things simple, sticking to local options whenever possible, eating where locals ate, shopping where prices were lower, adjusting without really thinking too much about it. Not because he was trying to save money, but because it just felt like the easiest way to settle in. The other didn't see a reason to change much. Not in a major way, not at first, but in small ways that didn't feel like they mattered, choosing more familiar foods when they were available, picking places that felt a little closer to what he was used to, grabbing items that reminded him of home, not every day, not all the time, just often enough that it started to become part of his routine. And in those early months, both approaches seemed to work. Their expenses were still low compared to what they expected. Nothing felt out of control. And if anything, it felt like they had more flexibility than they thought they would. The kind of flexibility that makes small decisions feel harmless, like spending a little more here or there, didn't really matter, because everything was still cheaper than back in the US. That's what made it so easy to overlook, because nothing looked like a problem. Not yet. At some point, without either of them really noticing when it started, the feeling of everything being easy began to change. Not all at once, not in a way that stood out, but slowly, quietly, in the background of their day-to-day lives, in ways that didn't feel important enough to stop and question at the time, and that was exactly what made it so easy to miss. For one of them, nothing really felt different. His routine stayed simple. His days stayed predictable, and even when small expenses came up, they didn't feel like anything more than part of normal life, something you expect no matter where you live, and because of that, there was never a moment where he felt like he needed to stop and adjust anything. But for the other, something started to feel slightly off. Not enough to cause concern, not enough to make him think he had made a mistake, but just enough to notice that the money he expected to have left at the end of the month didn't always look the same anymore. And at first, it was easy to explain away. Maybe he went out a little more that week. Maybe prices were just higher than he expected in that area. Maybe it was just one of those months where things cost a little more. And that's where it started. Not with one big expense, but with explanations. Each one small, each one reasonable, each one just enough to avoid looking deeper into what was actually happening, because nothing felt broken, nothing felt out of control, and as long as things still felt manageable, there was no real reason to question it. But the pattern was already there. He just couldn't see it yet. And the part he didn't realize, the part that wouldn't become clear until much later, was that it wasn't just about how much he was spending. It was how often those small decisions were happening. How often he chose convenience over cost. How often something slightly more expensive felt justified in the moment. How often just this once quietly became part of his routine. And while none of those choices seemed like they mattered on their own, together they were starting to shift something in the background, something slow, something subtle, something that didn't show up all at once but instead built over time in a way that was almost impossible to notice until it was already affecting everything. Meanwhile, the other retiree kept moving through his days without that pressure, not because he was trying harder, not because he was more disciplined, but because the way he had settled into life here naturally avoided that pattern without him even realizing it. And at this point, their lives still looked almost the same from the outside. But underneath that, something had already started to separate them, and neither of them fully understood it yet. It didn't happen in a way that was obvious at first, because when he thought about his expenses individually, everything still seemed reasonable. His rent was still within range, around 15,000 pesos a month, which felt like a good deal compared to what he was used to. His utilities didn't seem extreme most of the time, maybe 2,500 pesos one month, sometimes closer to 4,000 if the air conditioning ran longer during hotter weeks, and even his day-to-day spending didn't feel excessive when he looked at it in the moment. A meal here, maybe 150 pesos. A more familiar restaurant, closer to 400 or 500 pesos. Groceries that felt a little more like home, sometimes 2,000 to 3,000 pesos per trip. None of it felt like a problem. That was the part that made it so easy to justify. Because every single expense on its own felt small. Even transportation didn't seem like much at first. A few rides here and there, maybe 150 pesos, sometimes more depending on distance. Nothing that stood out enough to question. Nothing that felt like it could actually shift his monthly budget in a meaningful way. But it wasn't the size of the expenses that mattered. It was how often they were happening. What he didn't realize, what he never really stopped to calculate, was how quickly those small amounts added up over the course of a full month. How going from a 150 peso meal to a 400 peso meal just a few times a week quietly changed his total spending. How choosing convenience more often than he expected slowly pushed his daily average higher without him ever noticing it in the moment. And by the time the month ended, the numbers didn't look the way they did in his head. Instead of feeling like he had extra room, like things were under control, he started noticing that what was left over wasn't as much as he expected, not dramatically different, not enough to cause panic, but enough to feel like something wasn't lining up the way it should. Meanwhile, the other retiree was dealing with many of the same expenses, the same rent range, similar utility costs, similar access to food and transportation, but the way those numbers showed up at the end of the month looked completely different, because instead of fluctuating, his spending stayed more consistent. Meals closer to 120 or 150 pesos most days. Groceries focused on local items, often under 2,000 pesos. Transportation used when needed, but not something that quietly became part of his daily routine. And because of that, his monthly total didn't drift. It stayed predictable. And that difference, the difference between fluctuating spending and consistent spending, didn't seem important at first. But it was already setting the stage for what would happen next. Because neither of them had run into a real problem yet. And that was about to change. It didn't happen all at once, and that was what made it harder to deal with. It started with something small, the kind of thing that normally wouldn't feel like a big deal. A minor medical issue that needed to be checked, nothing serious, just enough to require a visit, some tests, a few follow-ups, and while each part of it seemed manageable on its own, the total cost ended up being more than he expected. Not devastating, but enough to take a noticeable piece out of what he had left for the month. At the same time, something else came up. The air conditioning unit in his place started having issues. Not completely broken, but inconsistent, running less efficiently, needing repairs that couldn't be ignored, especially in the middle of hotter days, where going without it wasn't really an option. And again, it wasn't one massive expense. It was a series of smaller ones that added up quickly. And then, almost on top of that, there was a situation back home. Something unexpected that required him to send money. Not a permanent change, not something he planned for long term, but something that couldn't be ignored, something that had to be handled right away. And just like that, within a short period of time, multiple things that were never part of the original plan started happening all at once. And that's when it finally became clear. Because for the first time since he arrived, the numbers didn't just feel tight. They didn't work. What had once felt like a comfortable monthly budget suddenly felt like it was missing something, like there was no room left to absorb anything unexpected, no buffer to fall back on, no space for things to go wrong without forcing a change in how he lived. Meanwhile, the other retiree faced similar moments. Not the exact same situations, not at the exact same time, but enough to test whether his budget could handle something unexpected. And it did. Not because he had more money, but because his spending had never drifted far enough to remove that margin. The difference wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious, but it was enough. And in the end, that's what separated them. They both retired to the Philippines with the same income, the same expectations, and the same belief that $2,000 a month would be enough. But only one of them planned for what would happen when things didn't go perfectly, and the other didn't fail because of one big mistake. He slowly ran out of room to make them. So, if you're thinking about retiring to the Philippines, the real question isn't how much you need. It's how much room you leave when things don't go as planned.